The 4th Parachute Brigade was an airborne, specifically a parachute infantry, brigade formation of the British Army during the Second World War. Formed in late 1942 in the Mediterranean and Middle East, the brigade was composed of 3 parachute infantry units, the 10th, 11th and 156th Parachute Battalions. The brigade was assigned to the 1st Airborne Division, just prior to the Allied invasion of Sicily, but played no part in the invasion. Instead, the brigade first saw action in September 1943, during Operation Slapstick, an amphibious landing at the port of Taranto. As part of the early stages of the Allied invasion of Italy, largely unopposed, the brigade captured the ports of Brindisi and Bari before being withdrawn. By the end of the year, the 4th Parachute Brigade was in England, preparing for the Allied invasion of Northwest Europe. The brigade did not see action in France, being instead placed on standby for an emergency during the Normandy landings. Between June and August 1944, the speed of the subsequent Allied advance obviated the need to deploy airborne forces. In September 1944, the brigade formed part of the second day's parachute landings at the Battle of Arnhem, part of Operation Market Garden. Problems reaching the bridges in Arnhem forced the divisional commander, Major General Roy Urquhart, to divert one of the brigade's battalions to assist the 1st Parachute Brigade. After a short delay, the brigade headed out for its objective. When only halfway there, however, the remaining 2 battalions were confronted by prepared German defenses. The brigade, having suffered heavy losses, was eventually forced to withdraw. The next day, weakened by fighting at close quarters and now numbering around 150 men, the brigade eventually reached the divisional position at Oosterbeek. After a week of being subjected to almost constant artillery, tank and infantry attacks, the remnants of the brigade were evacuated south of the River Rhine. During the Battle of Arnhem, the brigade's total casualties amounted to 78%, and the 4th Parachute Brigade was disbanded rather than reformed, the survivors being posted to the 1st Parachute Brigade formation. Impressed by the successful German airborne operations during the Battle of France, the British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, directed the War Office to investigate the possibility of creating a corps of 5,000 parachute troops. On the 22nd of June 1940, No. 2 Commando was turned over to parachute duties and, on the 21st of November, redesignated the 11th Special Air Service Battalion, with a parachute and glider wing. This was later to become the 1st Parachute Battalion. It was these men who took part in the first British airborne operation, Operation Colossus, on the 10th of February 1941. The success of the raid prompted the War Office to expand the existing airborne force, setting up the Airborne Forces Depot and Battle School in Derbyshire, and creating the Parachute Regiment, as well as converting a number of infantry battalions into airborne battalions. These battalions were assigned to the 1st Airborne Division with the 1st Parachute Brigade and the 1st Air Landing Brigade. The first general officer commanding of the division, Major General Frederick Arthur Montague (Boy) Browning, expressed his opinion that the fledgling force must not be sacrificed in penny packets, and urged the formation of more brigades. The 4th Parachute Brigade was formed at Raf Kibrit in the Middle East on the 1st of December 1942. Upon formation, it consisted of the brigade headquarters, signals company, defense platoon and 3 parachute battalions. The battalions assigned were the 156th Parachute Battalion, raised from British servicemen in India, the 10th Parachute Battalion, formed around a cadre from the 2nd Battalion, Royal Sussex Regiment, and the 11th Parachute Battalion, created from a cadre of 156 para. The brigade's battalions all had the same composition: 3 rifle companies, each comprising a company headquarters and 3 platoons. Each had support company of mortar, machine gun and carrier platoons, along with the headquarters company. The brigade's first commander, Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth Smith, was replaced by Brigadier John Hackett on 4 January 1943. Facilities and weather conditions at Kibrat proved to be unsuitable for airborne operations, so the brigade moved to Raf Ramat David in Palestine to continue the training. The brigade came to full strength in May 1943, and in June was sent to Tripoli, where it joined the 1st Airborne Division. Also assigned to the division were the 1st and 2nd Parachute Brigades and the glider infantry of the 1st Air Landing Brigade. In 1944, the brigade also had under the command 133 Parachute Field Ambulance, Royal Army Medical Corps, 2nd Air Landing Light Battery, Royal Artillery, 2nd Air Landing Anti-Tank Battery, Royal Artillery and 4th Parachute Squadron, Royal Engineers, Italy. In 1943, the 4th Parachute Brigade, although still part of the 1st Airborne Division, was kept out of the Allied invasion of Sicily by a shortage of transport aircraft. The 1st Air Landing Brigade took part in Operation Ladbrok and the 1st Parachute Brigade in Operation Fustian. Both brigades suffered heavy casualties, so that by the time Operation Slapstick was proposed, only the 2nd and 4th Parachute Brigades were up to strength. Slapstick was in part a deception operation to divert German forces from the main Allied landings and also an attempt to seize intact the Italian ports of Taranto, Bari and Brindisi. The lack of air transport meant that the division's 2 available brigades had to be transported by sea. They would cross the Mediterranean in 4 Royal Navy cruisers with their escorts. If the landing was successful, the British 78th Infantry Division in Sicily and the 8th Indian Infantry Division in the Middle East, under the command of British 5th Corps under Lieutenant General Charles Walter Alfrey, would be sent to reinforce the landings. With 11 para still in Palestine, the 4th Parachute Brigade only had 10 and 156 para available to take part in the landings. On the 9th of September 1943, the same day as the Salerno landings by Lieutenant General Mark Clark's U.S. 5th Army, the brigade landed at Taranto and opposed. The first objective was the airfield of Gioia del Colle 30 miles inland. En route to the airfield near the town of Castellaneta, 10 para came up against a German roadblock defended by a Fallschirmjäger unit of the German 1st Parachute Division. During the battalion's assault on the roadblock, Major General George Frederick Hopkinson, the general officer commanding 1st Airborne Division, observing the action, was hit by a burst of machine gun fire and killed. At the same time, 156 para at San Basilio carried out a successful flank attack on Fallschirmjäger defending the town. 2 days later, having been only involved in minor skirmishes, the brigade occupied Bari and Brindisi. By the 19th of September 1943, the 4th Para Brigade had reached Foggia, the northernmost point of their advance, before being ordered back to Taranto. Playing no further part in operations in Italy, the brigade was withdrawn by sea to the United Kingdom, arriving in November 1943. The 4th Parachute Brigade's casualties during the fighting in Italy amounted to 11 officers and 90 other ranks killed in action. In December 1943, 11 para, which had been working independently in the Mediterranean, rejoined the brigade. The only operation they had been involved in was a company-sized parachute assault on the Greek island of Kos. The Italian garrison surrendered and the company was relieved by men of the 1st Battalion, Durham Light Infantry and the RAF Regiment, England. In England, the brigade trained for operations in northwest Europe under the supervision of the 1st Airborne Corps, although they were not scheduled to take part in the Normandy landings. Under Operation Tuxedo, the brigade would be parachuted in to support operations if any of the 5 invasion beaches experienced difficulties. Tuxedo was the only operation planned where the brigade would act as an independent formation, whereas 13 other operations were prepared which would have deployed the entire 1st Airborne Division. However, the speed of the Allied advance towards the River Seine and then onwards from Paris northwards was accomplished without airborne assistance and the plans were cancelled. The brigade's next operation was scheduled for early September 1944. Codenamed Comet. The plan called for the 1st Airborne Division's 3 brigades to land in the Netherlands and capture 3 river crossings. The first of these was the bridge over the River Vaal at Nijmegen, the second the bridge over the River Maas at Grave and finally the River Rhine at Arnhem. The objective of the 4th Parachute Brigade would be the bridge at Grave. Planning for Comet was well advanced when on the 10th of September the mission was cancelled. Instead, a new Operation Market Garden was proposed whose objectives were the same as those of Comet but would this time be carried out by 3 divisions of the 1st Allied Airborne Army.